Have you ever said yes and felt your body say no? Your lips moved before your mind caught up. Your chest tightened, but the smile came anyway. It's automatic now, this reflex to please, to smooth, to cushion the sharp edges of other people's moods. But when the room finally empties, the silence does not soothe you. It presses. Your body feels heavier after every concession. Your jaw aches from smiling. Your heart beats like it ran a race you never chose to enter. This is the breaking point that no one sees, the moment an empath begins to question not the world, but themselves. Why does kindness cost so much in secret? Carl Jung called this moment the crack in the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted. For empaths, that mask is made of endless agreement. Always available. Always kind. Always useful. The persona buys belonging. But it sells the self. Tonight, though, something is different. Your stomach twists at the thought of showing up again for someone who never shows up for you. Your throat closes around another yes. A question rises, quiet but dangerous: what if I stopped? It is not rebellion yet. It is not sovereignty yet. But it is the seed. Jung wrote that consciousness begins when we notice what we've been unconsciously repeating. And this question, this fragile pause, is the first breath of truth. What happens when the empath stops pleasing everyone? The world calls it selfish. The psyche calls it survival. And history shows it is the start of transformation. You weren't born saying yes. You learned it. Not in a classroom, but in a living room where moods changed the weather. In a kitchen where the volume of footsteps predicted the night. In a bedroom where silence felt safer than honesty. Long before you knew the word boundary, your nervous system made a contract: if I keep you calm, maybe I'll be safe. Psychology has a name for this, the fawn response, a survival adaptation where appeasing becomes protection. It isn't weakness. It's intelligence under pressure. When fight or flight would have made things worse, your system chose a third path: soothe the storm, and maybe it won't break you. Attachment science sketches the outline. Children in unpredictable homes often become hyper-tuned, reading faces faster than words, catching sighs before sentences. Jung would say the persona begins here, a mask crafted for acceptance. For empaths, that mask is kindness without edges. Helpful, agreeable, unthreatening. It works, until it starts to erase you. Sensitivity adds fuel, not blame. Roughly 1 in 5 people are highly sensitive, processing stimuli more deeply, noticing subtleties others miss. In chaos, that trait is a lifesaver. In adulthood, paired with old contracts, it turns you into the family shock absorber at work, in friendships, in love. Here's the hidden cost: the body keeps score. Each yes that violates a no nudges your physiology toward chronic readiness. Breath shallows. Muscles brace. Sleep lightens. You become expert at managing other people's nervous systems and amateur at regulating your own. Jung warned that what we disown doesn't vanish, it moves to the shadow. Your anger didn't disappear, it learned to speak as migraines. Your no didn't die, it learned to hide behind exhaustion. Your desire didn't go away, it learned to disguise itself as overgiving. This is the early contract in one sentence: I'll abandon myself so you won't abandon me. It kept you attached. It also kept you small. So when people call you too nice, they're misreading the artifact of an old survival strategy as a personality. You weren't born a doormat. You were trained to be weatherproof. Try this: when a request arrives, don't answer. Locate your body first. Feel your feet. Name 3 sensations. Then ask, what am I actually willing to offer without resentment? If your mouth races ahead, Borrow this line, let me check and get back to you. Buy your nervous system time to choose instead of comply. And practice a tiny no daily. Decline a group chat, a minor favor, a late-night reply. Each rep builds the muscle you were never allowed to grow. You didn't choose the early contract, but you get to choose the next one. People think people-pleasing is just a personality quirk. But the body knows better. Each time you said yes when you meant no, your pulse spiked. Each time you swallowed anger to keep the peace, cortisol dripped into your bloodstream. Every apology you gave for things you didn't do left fingerprints on your immune system. Medicine calls this allostatic load, the cumulative wear and tear of living on red alert. For empaths, the load doubles. You carry your own stress and the stress of everyone you absorb. Migraines that arrive like clockwork, a stomach that clenches before you even realize you're anxious. Fatigue that sleep never cures. Psychologists note that chronic people-pleasing is not just social behavior, it's a survival reflex. Your nervous system wires itself to overattune, to prevent conflict before it happens. But this reflex has a cost. It teaches your body to treat everyday life like a battlefield. Carl Jung warned that what we refuse to face in consciousness will surface in other ways. For empaths, the unspoken grief of pleasing everyone doesn't vanish, it reroutes through the body. Autoimmune flares, digestive issues, restless nights. Symptoms that whisper, then shout, you are carrying too much that is not yours. And here's the paradox, the empath's exhaustion is not proof of failure. It is proof of fidelity. Your body kept the contract faithfully, until it couldn't. When you finally stop pleasing everyone, you don't just reclaim time or energy. You begin to renegotiate at the deepest level, with your own nervous system. You teach it, slowly, through grounding, through breath, through boundaries, that safety no longer requires self-erasure. It never begins with a grand declaration. It begins with a whisper. The empath hears the familiar request, the one that usually summons an automatic yes. But this time, something interrupts the reflex. A pause. A breath. A question, what if I didn't? The first no arrives awkwardly. Sometimes it's mumbled. Sometimes it's hidden behind excuses. Sometimes it leaks out only after exhaustion has already forced collapse. Yet even clumsy, it is seismic. Why? Because that no is not simply a refusal. It is the breaking of a psychic contract, the unspoken agreement signed in childhood, I will carry your storms so you won't abandon me. Breaking this contract feels like betrayal, because for years it was the only strategy for safety. But psychologists call this rupture necessary. Without rupture, no true self emerges. Carl Jung described individuation as the refusal to live only as someone else's projection. To say no without collapse is the first step toward becoming more than a mask. But after the first no, loneliness often follows. Friends pull back. Colleagues whisper. Family's guilt. You feel the echo of abandonment your body always feared. Yet loneliness here is not emptiness, it is the clearing before growth. Each no re-educates the nervous system. Each refusal rewrites the body's script, safety no longer depends on erasure. Every empath knows the fear of becoming too much. Too angry, too selfish, too demanding. So you exile those parts early. Carl Jung warned that what we repress does not vanish. It waits. The shadow is not evil, it is the unlived life. And for the empath, the shadow is full of powers disowned to survive. Dreams begin to speak in images, warriors at gates, lions pacing at your feet, storms swelling offshore. These are not threats. They are instructions. At first, it feels dangerous. Anger rises and you fear it will make you cruel. Desire flickers and you fear it will make you selfish. Defiance surfaces and you fear it will make you just like the narcissist you escaped. But these are not signs of becoming them. They are proof you never will. Healthy anger protects boundaries. Desire fuels vitality. Defiance anchors individuality. Try this: when anger rises, instead of suppressing it, ask, what is this trying to protect? Research on functional anger shows that when acknowledged, anger sharpens judgment and reduces stress. It protects rather than destroys. The shadow does not return to punish you. It returns to guard you. Most people think boundaries are lines you draw with words. But for empaths, words collapse the moment the body obeys old reflexes. You can say "I won't let them control me," and still feel your stomach twist at their silence. You can say "I deserve space," and still feel guilt spike when you take it. That's because your nervous system was trained to synchronize with other people's storms. Heart racing at their anger. Muscles freezing at their disapproval. Breath shortening before conflict even arrived. These weren't choices. They were survival. So the work ahead is not just mental, it is physiological. Boundaries that last must live in the body. Neuroscience shows why. When you fuse with another's pain, your brain lights up in the same regions as physical injury. That's empathic distress, you drown alongside them. But when compassion is active, a different circuit steadies you. You still care. But your heart rate doesn't spike. Your breath doesn't vanish. You can respond, or you can walk away. This is the shift from sponge to tuning fork. A sponge soaks until it bursts. A tuning fork resonates with another's note, then returns to its own pitch. It vibrates, but it does not absorb. How do you build this? Not through rules taped to a wall, but through daily anchors, feeling your feet on the ground when guilt pulls you off balance. Exhaling longer than you inhale when shame rises. Letting silence do its work instead of rushing to explain. Each time you practice, you are not just setting a boundary. You are retraining your nervous system to believe, we are safe enough to stay whole. And here lies the surprise. Boundaries don't shrink compassion. They expand it, because when you're no longer drowning in empathic distress, you have energy left to give. Energy for authentic care, for chosen connection, for love that doesn't erase you. This is what the narcissists never imagined. They thought breaking you would end you. Instead, breaking you forced you to learn an empathy that cannot be exploited. Boundaries that breathe are not walls. They are membranes. They let life through, but they do not let poison stay. For most empaths, guilt is the leash. It tightens every time you say no. It pulls every time you put yourself first. It whispers that self-care is selfish, that boundaries are cruelty, that refusing to carry someone else's weight makes you unloving. But guilt is not truth. It is conditioning. Developmental psychology shows that children in unpredictable homes often confuse compliance with safety. They learn that peace comes not from being authentic, but from being agreeable. Over time, guilt becomes the internal guardrail that keeps you in line, long after the threat has disappeared. This is why so many empaths feel guilty even when they've done nothing wrong. The guilt isn't proof of selfishness, it's the echo of survival training. The turning point comes when you stop treating guilt as a verdict and start treating it as a signal. When guilt spikes after you say no, you pause and ask, does this guilt belong to my values, or to someone else's expectations? Neuroscience backs this up. Studies on moral emotion show that guilt is often triggered by social disapproval rather than actual harm done. Which means guilt doesn't always measure right or wrong. More often, it measures whether you've broken an unspoken contract to keep others comfortable. And here's the paradox: when you stop obeying guilt, clarity arrives. What once felt like selfishness begins to feel like accuracy. You realize the difference between actual responsibility and manufactured responsibility. Between true care and coerced caretaking. This is why survivors often describe the first months after breaking the people-pleasing pattern as disorienting. You feel guilty less often, but when you do, you no longer collapse under it. You interrogate it, and in that interrogation, guilt loses its teeth. The empath who once apologized for existing begins to ask sharper questions: am I actually harming them, or just refusing to be harmed myself? Am I abandoning them, or simply not abandoning me? Is this guilt guiding me, or is it gaslighting me? And when those questions become second nature, the leash snaps. Who do you become after surviving? Not someone who feels nothing, but someone who sees guilt for what it is, not a compass, but a fog. The fog clears, and beneath it lies a steadier landscape: clarity. Clarity is not cold. It is clean, and it is the ground from which authentic love can finally grow. When the guilt dissolves, something unexpected stirs. Beneath the polite mask, beneath the carefully controlled compassion, another figure waits, the part of you that never agreed to the contract in the first place. This is the wild self. Psychologists describe individuation as the process of reuniting with disowned traits. For empaths, this often means rediscovering the qualities they buried to stay safe: anger, defiance, appetite, the refusal to bend. These traits weren't erased, they were exiled. An exile does not kill, it preserves. The wild self appears in dreams and symbols: a wolf guarding your path, a storm you no longer run from, a fire that burns clean rather than destructive. These are not threats. They are messages: you are not only the healer, you are also the protector. Anthropology reminds us that every culture has a rite of passage where the tamed child must encounter their untamed essence. In myth, the wild figure is often terrifying: the lion, the serpent, the warrior, but only because it holds the strength the initiate most fears. For the empath, that fear is: if I let this out, I will become like them. But here is the truth Jung insisted on: the shadow traits, when integrated, do not make you cruel. They make you whole. Healthy anger protects boundaries. Desire fuels vitality. Defiance anchors individuality. The wild self is not against your empathy, it is the guardian of it. Without it, compassion collapses into martyrdom. With it, compassion gains spine. This is why people notice the shift when the empath awakens. You're no longer endlessly agreeable. You don't nod along to lies. You don't shrink when confronted. Instead, your presence unsettles those who once fed on your silence. They sense something they can't name, but they feel it: the wildness has returned. And here lies the paradox. The more you reclaim your wild self, the calmer you become. Because now you carry the full spectrum of who you are. You don't fear your own fire anymore. You know it burns to protect, not to destroy. Who do you become after surviving? Someone who is no longer domesticated by guilt. Someone who carries both tenderness and ferocity without apology. Someone whose empathy is not a performance, but a force of nature. When the empath stops pleasing, the world looks different. The fog that once blurred motives clears. The tricks that once hooked you fall flat. You begin to see, not through paranoia, but through pattern. This is the shift from absorption to discernment. Neuroscience calls it metacognition, the ability to step back and observe your own thoughts rather than be swept away by them. Depth psychology frames it as the withdrawal of projection. Instead of assuming everyone is as deep, sensitive, or well-intentioned as you are, you start to see people as they truly are. The difference is immediate. Before, you mistook urgency for importance. Now you ask, who benefits if I rush? Before, you believed guilt meant you had done wrong. Now you ask, does this guilt fit the facts, or is it someone else's tool? Before, you equated intensity with love. Now you notice, sometimes intensity is simply chaos wearing perfume. This is not cynicism. It is accuracy. Accuracy is what emerges when empathy is no longer clouded by compulsion. Carl Jung warned that without discernment, compassion becomes inflation, what he called sentimental weakness, a compulsive need to rescue. But when the empath integrates shadow, boundaries, and wildness, compassion becomes clear. It no longer blinds. It illuminates. The truth is sobering, some people you loved were not loving you back. They were feeding. Some crises you rushed to solve were never yours to carry. Some apologies you gave were rehearsed performances for crimes you never committed. And yet, seeing this truth doesn't make you bitter. It makes you steady. Because you no longer need to prove, to argue, to expose. You simply stop investing where there is no reciprocity. You stop mistaking survival contracts for intimacy. You stop paying debts that were never yours. Who do you become after you stop pleasing? Someone who sees clearly without hardening, who loves wisely without erasing, who discerns without drowning. Survival was never the goal. Pleasing was never the purpose. What you were reaching for all along was sovereignty, the ability to feel without dissolving, to love without erasing, to live without permission. Picture yourself standing at the threshold of your own life. The old masks, the smile that soothed, the silence that submitted, the endless yes, are scattered on the ground like costumes after a long play. For years you believed they were your skin. Now, without them, you finally feel your own pulse. The empath who stops pleasing doesn't become selfish. They become sovereign, and as you walk forward, unmasked, unburdened, unafraid, you carry a truth that is both personal and universal. The empath's gift was never endless giving. The gift was the power to see. So let me ask you, when you stop pleasing, what will you finally see?